Welcome to the Cold Case Christianity broadcast, the only Christian case-making program hosted by a cold case homicide detective. J. Warner Wallace has been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Court TV, and Dateline. For more information about Jim's work and the case for Christianity, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. Now, here's your host, J. Warner Wallace.
Thanks for joining us at Cold Case Christianity. I'm J. Warner Wallace. This week we're going to talk about conspiracy theories. And the reason why I'm going to bring it up is because, number one, I do have experience working conspiracies. I worked a number of these as criminal investigations, both when I was working in gangs and when I was working robbery homicide, where we might have more than one person involved in a murder conspiracy. Now, sometimes I'll talk about conspiracy theories and what's required to be successful in conspiracy theories in an effort to talk about the claim that sometimes skeptics will make related to the 12 disciples who allegedly formed a large conspiracy to tell the elaborate lie of the death and resurrection of Jesus in order to start a world religion or for whatever other reason. And so I think it's important for us to examine the nature of conspiracies, and all of us should know something about how difficult they are to actually pull off in order to address skeptical objections. But there's another, I got a recent message on my Facebook account, which I'll read to you in a minute, that really kind of brought another dimension, another avenue, a concern related to conspiracies, aside from the possible conspiracy of the 12. Let me read you the message and you can see what I'm talking about here. He says, "Greetings from a 2 to 3 year listener all the way from across the globe." He says, "Keep up the great work with what you all do. A quick question regarding conspiracy theories. I attend a church," he says, "where a growing number of people are getting into this stuff," and he gives a couple of examples of the Illuminati or of 9/11 conspiracies. "Frankly, I think it's rubbish, but it's hard to argue with them on it. Any help would be appreciated. Keep doing what you're doing. You're sounding great from over here." Okay. I think there is an aspect of conspiracy theories and understanding how these actually are successful and when they can be successful that would help us as we assess not only the claims that the 12 are conspiring to lie to us about Jesus, but also there are a number of historic conspiracies that it seems to me that we as Christians sometimes will buy into or we're curious about. Anything from Da Vinci Code kind of conspiracies to the kinds of conspiracies that are sometimes claimed in the culture. If it's the assassination of a political leader or a historic tragic event like 9/11. Are these vast, large conspiracies involving huge sectors of the federal government and hundreds of people who are trying to pull the wool over our eyes? Well, let's take a look at this claim. And we're going to do it by looking at the 5 important characteristics of conspiracy theories that are required, that must be in place in order for a conspiracy to be successful. Now, I'll tell you that I'm not bringing this information to you from an investigative textbook that I read or from something out of scripture. I'm actually just going to give you the 5 attributes that in 20 years of working criminal cases of this nature, actually more than that, but the point is, during that time I've had some expertise working conspiracies that I think I can parlay into answering this question. So for the writer of this question, I'm directing this to you today, I want to show you what's required. I'm going to give you a list right now on your screen. Take a look at it. These are the 5 things that are necessary for conspiracies to be successful. And then I'll show you after the break how you might attack a conspiracy theory, how you might try to break a conspiracy in working a criminal case, okay? So the first thing you need is you need the lowest, smallest possible number of co-conspirators. Now, this is just common sense, it seems to me, but it's also practically so. I've experienced this in my casework, that if you've got 2 people trying to hold a conspiracy, that's a lot easier than, say, 25 people trying to hold a conspiracy because you've got fewer people to slip up and give it away. That just seems like common sense, doesn't it? So the smaller the number of conspirators involved in the alleged conspiracy, the higher the rate of success for such a conspiracy. The next thing you need is you need a conspiracy that has to be held for the shortest or lowest amount of time. If you're trying to hold a conspiracy for a day, well, you might have some success. Try to hold the same conspiracy for a year, that's tougher because you got a longer period of time in which you can slip up. Now think about this. If you got a low number of conspirators who are holding it for a short period of time, well, then you got a chance of getting away with the conspiracy. So for example, if 2 people commit a crime and at the completion of the crime, one kills the other, Well, gosh, this is a great conspiracy that no one can break unless the person confesses to it outright, because you've only got one person left who knows the truth, and he only had 2 people involved in this crime for a short period of time. So the lower the number and the shorter period of time, the more successful you're likely to be in involving in a conspiracy, or involved in a crime that requires a conspiracy. There's a third factor, though, that also is important, and it's probably the most important factor for me as an investigator. It's the tool that I use the most, and that is that you have to have excellent communication between co-conspirators. Remember, at some point, someone's going to stop you and ask you, hey, what'd you do? What's going on with that day? What exactly were your plans? What happened on the actual day of the crime? And you, as one of the co-conspirators, is going to be giving a story to the investigator about what actually happened. Now, if I stop the other conspirator, or 2 or 3 of the other co-conspirators, and I ask them the same questions, they're going to have to be able to answer those questions in precisely the same way that you did. So if you get stopped and give a story, I need to call you. I can say, hey, what did you tell that guy? Because I need to tell him the same thing. Now you might think, well, wait a minute, couldn't we cover some of these details in advance of the crime? Yes, you can. But as an investigator, I'm not going to stay with just the superficial, top level kinds of information. I'm going to be asking you the details. I'm going to be getting in the weeds with you on the details, because I want to find those little areas that you would never even thought to ask or to talk about with your co-conspirator. And since you can't recall this from memory because you're making it up, I'm going to catch you in a discrepancy between you and your co-conspirator. At some point, the only way to avoid that is to have excellent communication. This is why, if you're standing together when I interview you, that would be great, because you'd hear every question I'm asking the other guy. So those are the first 3 things. There's a 4th category that you really need in place in order to be successful. And that is, if you can, involve a family member, because you've got a bond which transcends even the crime. Family members are bonded to each other in a way that they're even likely sometimes to want to go to their grave before they turn over a family member. Moms, for example, are very unlikely to waive their rights in a Miranda waiver to talk to me about a case that might involve their son. Now, sadly, it's not always true in the opposite direction. But the point I'm trying to make here is, if I've got a strong family bond between co-conspirators, well, gosh, it's a good chance that you're not going to be able to break that bond, because there's something more at play here than simply involvement in a crime. There's a family connection. Last thing, pressure. If there's no pressure on the co-conspirators, to tell us the truth, then stand by. They're not going to tell us the truth. So unless I start to apply some pressure, unless they have some fear of being caught or fear of being punished, or in the old days, like a 24 Jack Bauer, right, where you just do whatever it takes to get the guy to confess. If there's some fear of death or of brutal pain or whatever it may be, then you've got a better chance of getting the truth. So if no one ever even asks what happened, well then, of course, no one's going to find out the conspiracy or uncover the conspiracy, because no one's ever applied any pressure. No one's ever applied any, ever even asked the questions to begin with. So these are important factors that have to be considered. If you have the smallest number of co-conspirators and holding this conspiracy for the shortest possible time, with excellent communication between co-conspirators and a family relationship, and no one's even applying any pressure, well, you can pull that kind of conspiracy off. But if you don't have all 5 of those things, stand by. An investigator like me is going to try to exploit what you don't have in place. And we'll talk about that right after the break.
In addition to Jim's daily blog and weekly podcasts and videos, Jim continues to write books designed to help you become a better Christian casemaker. At coldcasechristianity.com, you'll find a link to Cold Case Christianity, a homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels, and Alive, a cold case approach to the resurrection. These resources will help you defend what you believe and share it with others.
Okay, so now you know the 5 things that are required, or that really are important if you want to be successful in a conspiracy. By the way, if you're somebody who says, well, look, I can tell you, I know there are some successful conspiracies and you can name them, bump, 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 bump. Well, think about this for a second. A successful conspiracy is one you get away with, which means that no one ever finds out there was a conspiracy to begin with. If you know of a conspiracy, can you really call it successful? If you think about it, the best conspiracies are one that you might have you can imagine it, but really you'd never really know, because it's successful. They actually got away with it. Nobody gave up the truth and exposed the conspiracy. So I think success in terms of conspiracies is when you actually get away with it and nobody discovers that it's a conspiracy to begin with. And of course the problem is you can't have that kind of success if you're, well, you can have it, but no one's going to know about it. If you think you know about one, that's not a successful one. So let's just start with that premise. But let me go one more step with you. Let's talk about how we might break that. Now that you know the 5 rules, the 5 attributes of successful conspiracies, let's talk about how you might break that if you had a conspiracy in place. And I'll use an example from my casework. I'll change the details a little bit so that you won't expose family members or other potential suspects, although this case is adjudicated. I had a case several years ago where a man was killed in his home. And I was called out. I don't work fresh homicides. I work cold cases. That's what I do for a living. And so I'm not going to be involved in usually a new homicide. I'm involved if it goes cold for 30 years. But I got called out that night because at the time I was one of the oldest guys on the team. And I think they were just trying to make sure that the team actually functioned properly and I can maybe give some advice, even though it's not going to end up being my case. As a matter of fact, when I got there, the case agent who was assigned this case, he was younger than me, and it was his first homicide ever. And so we get a chance to look at the crime scene, and he asked me, "What do you think?" And I looked at the scene. I kind of agreed with him. It looked like at least 2 people were involved in this murder. This is going to be a conspiracy, or it's going to at least involve 2 people. And you could just tell from the scene, from the nature of the body we were looking at, that it took more than one person to commit this crime. So he asked me, he said, I think we've got at least one of these guys. We have an idea of who this first guy should be. Should we go out and arrest him? And I said, no. We don't want to arrest him. We want to watch him. Our agency happens to have a surveillance team. I worked on that surveillance team for 4 years. I know how it works. And I said, look, what we want to do is we want to send our team out on that guy if you think you know who he is, if you think you know where he's living, and we'll just take a look at him. If you think he's involved with somebody else in this crime, maybe we'll get lucky and see him over the next couple of days, connect with somebody that we could actually identify as a secondary in our crime. Sure enough, we get out on the surveillance team gets out on the first guy, and we see him with another person, another male, in the victim's car driving around town. So clearly we now have the victim's car connecting the first suspect to the crime, and we have a secondary in the car with him. This is great. And I told them, I said, if we're going to watch this guy, let's give it a few days. For all we know, there's a third person involved. Let's just give it a few days and see what we see. We won't lose him. If you think you're going to be exposed and you're going to be seen by the suspect, well, we'll take him to jail. But don't let him know at any cost. Do not let him know. Do not let either of them know that they have been watched by a surveillance team. Okay, great. We watch him for 4 days. At the end of 4 days, we take him to jail. He has no idea he's been watched. They actually had traffic warrants, so we took him to jail for the traffic warrants. We get them both in custody. Now, I want you to think about the nature of conspiracies and what we had in this case. We had 2 suspects, so that's the smallest possible conspiracy you can have. They have the first element. They've got us there. The second element, short period of time. They've only had to hold it for 4 days, and they've got us there. Well, they don't have us in the fourth element, though. The fourth element is all about family relationships. They weren't related by family. They weren't blood. They weren't blood relations. They were just friends. So that was good. So we kind of can beat them on that one. But now we have 2 other areas we can still control, which is number 1, can we apply pressure at the very bottom of your list here? Can we apply pressure? And number 2, can we eliminate communication between these 2 men? Well, we could do that. So we brought them into custody and we separated them immediately and put them in 2 separate rooms. Then what I did is I walked into the first room after a couple of hours. I waited a couple of hours, and I walked into the first room, and I told that guy, hey, tell you what, I just been spending the last 2 hours talking to your buddy, which wasn't true, but I told him this. And I tell you, he doesn't want to go to jail for what he says you did, and I'm inclined to believe him. I think he was probably had a minor role in this. He says you were responsible of everything from the planning to the execution of this murder. And he doesn't want to go to jail for what he says you did. So I'm inclined to believe him. And he told me everything you did. I mean, he told me the whole crime and everything you've been doing since the crime. And then I began to tell the first suspect everything that our surveillance team had been watching them do, as though the second guy actually told me. And of course he hadn't, but because I eliminated communication between these 2 men and applied pressure, this guy started to lose his cool.